Um, Hi, I'm Ian. I'm a sophomore at Stanford University studying computer science. I'm super excited to interview as part of this celebration of API Heritage Month. Do you want to give you a quick introduction for yourself?
Sure, I'm Clarence Lamb. I represent District 12 in the Maryland General Assembly. I serve in the state Senate and serve in the Senate Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee.
Awesome. Do you mind sharing some of your personal experience that inspired you to pursue a career in both medicine and politics?
Yeah, so I think there's a common theme in politics and medicine, and that is to help people. And so growing up, I've always had an interest in service. And so with my background, I was a pre-med major in college and double majored in biology and political science. So had a very strong interest in kind of both fields as I was growing up. And I think that came from just a sense of being second generation born here, but my parents were from China and Taiwan, recognizing that I had a lot of opportunities here that I wouldn't have had elsewhere, and was very fortunate in that regard. And so wanted to be able to continue to give back to the community that had been so generous in providing to me and my family. And that was what really inspired me into a career of public service. And so, when I came to medical school, I recognized that I was still interested in helping the community more broadly, besides just in medicine and their health. And that's what also kind of led me along the path of the political career of serving folks, not just in those aspects, but also when it comes to education, the environment, technology, infrastructure, transportation, all these other things that we can really get involved in that are also really important issues to our community. And so it's really been an honor to be able to serve.
Do you have any memorable moments or, challenging events that you faced as a state senator?
Yeah, I think one of the most challenging parts of being an elected official is one that you represent a district, right? And you hope that most of the time your district that you represent shares the same perspectives as you as an individual. It's challenging because as an elected official, you have your own personal feelings, you have your own personal opinions also. And most of the time, they're probably in alignment with the district, but sometimes they're not. And so you face a really challenging choice of trying to decide between supporting a policy that maybe you personally are not fully in favor of or have some reservations about, but that's where your district is. And so, you go ahead and vote for it because that's what the people represented, the people voted for you to do. But sometimes, you also view an issue through the lens of history, knowing that your vote's going to mean something and people are going to look back at your vote and see how you voted on an issue to determine what their perspectives are in the future. And so, where it may be particularly challenging is where your district is not in alignment with your personal views, but you realize that through the lens of history, this might be the right thing to do to vote for this bill, even if your district is not supportive of it, and you do the right thing. And so those challenges are not infrequent, right? And so as an elected official, you're always trying to balance those interests, knowing that you represent thousands of people and their views, but that you also have your own personal views, and you're also cognizant about making sure that in the lens of history, you're doing the right thing.
Awesome. That's a great answer. Do you have any specific examples of sort of like a challenging issue or vote that you've had to take?
So I think one example is, if you were to look at this issue broadly, it's one of LGBT equality. I think when you look back, there's been, even in the recent history, a change in where the electorate has been on this issue. And my district has been fortunate in that I believe it's strongly supportive of LGBT rights. And so, I've been fortunate to be able to support that. But not long ago, I would say our district may not have been as strongly as favor of this. And this probably predates my term in office, but my predecessor probably faced some really challenging choices when it comes to whether to support LGBTQ equality or not, and recognizing that this vote is probably the right thing to do in the lens of history, but sometimes people's districts and the electorate is not there yet. And what do you do in that instance? Do you vote with what you think is the right thing to do? Or do you vote to represent who sent you to serve in that position? In an ideal world, those would be in alignment, right? Those would be perfectly aligned with each other. So what's the right thing to do is also what your district believes in. But sometimes it's not. And that's where it becomes incredibly challenging as an elected official to weigh all of those things and make a decision.
Thanks. So given the, I guess, disparity between the population of Asian Americans in the United States and also Maryland, and the representation within the demographics of both Congress as a whole, but also the Maryland State Assembly, which you're a part of. Do you ever feel like you also represent sort of not just your district, but also Asian Americans in general in Maryland?
Yeah, quite often actually. I think we recognize that while our voting constituents are those that live in our legislative district, we have constituents that are not able to vote for us, but yet we still represent. And so all of us elected officials come from different backgrounds, oftentimes different careers, grew up in different families, may have experienced even different childhood experiences. And we carry those along with us, but also recognize that those are communities that we touch on as well. So while there are a lot of Asian Americans that live in my district, there are a lot that don't live in my district too. Even in the county that I live in Howard County in Maryland, the vast majority, I think, of the Asian Americans living in this county don't actually live in my district. And there are many, of course, that live throughout the state. However, I still view them as my constituents as well, because oftentimes it's really important for people to turn to someone they feel comfortable with, someone who may be a familiar face to them, someone who shares their values or had similar experiences growing up, understand some of the challenges that their families go through. And so, oftentimes we will be very responsive to these individuals, even if they're not our voting constituencies, recognize that they still need to have a voice, that they may not be represented by someone that directly understands their experiences, and that they're reaching out to you because they feel a connection to you. And that's incredibly important for us as elected officials to recognize that we have these other constituencies that we need to represent as well. So the Asian Americans here in the state are one of those communities for me that I are particularly cognizant about and much open to listening to their concerns. Another example is the medical community. So as the only physician serving in the Senate of Maryland, I think there's a lot of healthcare workers and medical providers that reach out to me in my office because they believe that we can be very responsive to the concerns that they're familiar with and that they bring forward. And so we do try to be particularly cognizant about listening to their concerns so we can help them in addressing some of these challenges that they're seeing as well.
Great. So as an Asian American elected official then, what do you think is the cause of the lack of representation that Asian Americans, have in the elected legislatures, and what do you think can be done to fix that?
I think the greatest challenge is navigating through a political system that is not the easiest for a novice, right? And there's no easy instruction book or manual on how to run for office or to serve. I think a lot of Asian Americans want to help their community. They want to serve people, but it's not a natural avenue to turn to run for office because it's not an easy thing to do. That said, I think we, particularly those of us who are Asian American electeds, which, there aren't many of them, we're underrepresented. We do try to reach out to other Asians that are interested in running to help give them that guidance, give them that support. We recognize that we had so many from the Asian American community that supported us allow us to first get elected into our roles, that it's really a way to be able to pay it back to our community and to inspire the next generation of leaders to serve in these positions. And we think it's particularly important so that we're not the ones that we're just blazing a path for others to be able to continue along this journey, and recognizing that at some point, with enough support and resources and inspiration, we will see our Asian American community have the level of representation that they've earned and deserve in these legislatures.
Awesome, thanks. Yeah, now I'd like to ask a few questions about, I think, sort of current issues that really face that Asian Americans are really facing right now and are really troubling for some of us. So given COVID-19's origin, in China, and the fact that that caused a lot of racism towards Chinese Americans, what do you think that sort of individual, AAPI citizens can do against racism? I know that Andrew Yang, who's a prominent American politician, not elected official, had a very controversial statement where it's like Asian Americans need to act more American than even regular Americans, and that had a lot of controversy. What's your take on this issue?
So I think for us, it's important for us to speak out and to voice our concerns. It was interesting because with all of the recent reports of discrimination and hate and bias and crimes against Asian Americans as a result of the heightened political rhetoric during this pandemic, we've seen our Asian American community mobilize. It's one of the rare occasions where we've seen really the whole community come together and galvanize in opposition to these incidents that we are seeing. Just a few weeks ago in my district, we had a large rally that was organized by Asian Americans, that was well attended even by members of the community who were not Asian American, and they stood with us. And I think that was particularly inspiring because oftentimes culturally we're not ones to speak up, that we are more reserved and are not necessarily ones that will ask for help. And so we as a community now seem to be turning a page in our willingness to be able to come together, to speak out as a community, to oppose the violence and discrimination that we were seeing, and to make our concerns public. And so that, I think, is a big step for our community. We haven't seen that in an organized way or effort in recent times. But I think it's an important first step because it's important for us as a community to recognize that there is a real concern here, that we are not going to stand silent as these incidents occur, that we also alone cannot solve this problem, but we need to work with the broader community, with other ethnic groups, and even non-Asians, to be able to push back and voice our concerns, and to have greater programs and services and funding to be able to safeguard our community and prevent them from occurring in the future. All of that starts by recognizing that there's a problem and that we need to speak up and report these incidents when they occur. And so I think we've taken as a community many good first steps. We just need to keep that momentum going. It's unfortunate that it takes incidents like these and this heightened political rhetoric to be able to bring the community together. But I think this is an opportune time for us to speak with a unified voice to make sure that these types of incidents don't happen again.
Well, you're a member of the State Assembly. Do you think that sort of government entities should be taking action? And if so, what actions do you think they should be taking?
I think all of us have a hand in taking action. I think all of us can do our part and need to do our part. I don't think that government on its own can actually solve this problem. Government can help and can help safeguard our community, but we need to have a community dialogue. We need to have our Asian American community willing to speak up. We need to have them willing to report these types of incidents so that we have a sense and an accurate count of how often they're occurring. Because just like we learned recently with the census, if you don't stand up to get counted, you'll get lost. And so it's important for us to have a sense of the magnitude of these types of incidents. And I think they're being underreported. But once we have a good sense of how often they're occurring and the severity with which they're occurring, we can help direct resources or support better law enforcement, better legal protections, better outreach programs to prevent them from occurring again. But it all starts with a community willing to come together, a community recognizing that there's a concern, individuals who unfortunately experience these types of incidents willing to speak up and report them so that we can take the next steps to respond and make sure that we have resources and programs in place to prevent them from occurring again. I think elected officials are very cognizant of this problem and willing to speak up and stand with our community. But that's where reporting this is incredibly important. These days we know how much having a video of something occurring means, or having eyewitness accounts. All of that is really contributing to a sense of the magnitude of the problem, and that will really help address the needed resources that our community needs to be able to reduce these types of incidents.
Thanks. One of the points, you made in your answer about sort of, Asian Americans being sometimes unwilling to stand up, sort of reminds me of the whole model minority myth. I think, across America, there's some school district in Washington State that says Asians aren't students of color. I personally know students at Stanford who've said that, East Asians don't count as students of color, as people of color. How do you think sort of this model minority myth harms Asian Americans, and what can we do to sort of fix this representation that causes?
Yeah, I think that's the myth certainly does harm our community. I think it perpetuates a stereotype that doesn't reflect the diverseness of our community, right? I think the myth is that, we're all highly educated, come from wealthy backgrounds, have no troubles in the world, can all find an easy job, all have healthcare. And that's just not true. We as an Asian American community recognize that even within the Asian American community, we are very diverse. We come from different backgrounds, we have different experiences, we have different income levels, we have different challenges, even within the ethnic minority groups within the Asian American community. And to paint us broadly with the brush of being a model minority, I think does a disservice to our community and waves us off like we are one single community without any differences, and therefore don't have any needs as well. And I think that is very challenging to address because it's perpetuated by individuals that don't understand our community. And that's where we, in dialogue that we have, in outreach that we use to reach out to folks that are not in the Asian American community, I think can engage and also educate them that we're not a monolithic community, that we have many differences. Our differences really are our strength, whether within the Asian American community or outside. And we cherish that diversity, but we also want the general public to recognize that there are a lot of differences there, and there's also a lot of need. And unfortunately, the myth really kind of waves all of those off. So, I think we have a lot of work ahead of us to be able to counter that, because in society, whether it's in television, in common culture, in language, people seem to wave Asian Americans off as, an easy community that doesn't have any needs. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. So we have a lot of work to do to reorient people to our community.
Thanks. Well, obviously also the model minority myth creates a lot of conflict between Asian Americans and other sort of minorities and other ethnic groups. In addition to, racism is prevalent, I think, among the Asian American community. How do you think that the Asian American community can better build bridges with other ethnic and minority communities?
So I think we can build bridges by recognizing that these are all civil rights issues. Traditionally, civil rights issues are viewed as being associated with the African American community. But, I think we now recognize that it's not pertaining to just one ethnic group. And certainly the racism and discrimination that we see are not just against particular ethnic groups, but when people that espouse these views discriminate and voice hate to particular ethnic groups, they probably do so to others as well. And so it's important for us as a community to stand with our other brothers and sisters from other ethnic communities as well, the African American community, the Latino community, and others, in recognizing that any form of discrimination, any type of bias, any forms of hate against one type of people is an affront to all of us. And we are all willing to stand together to voice our concerns and make sure that we show a unified front when it comes to these types of discrimination and crimes and hate. And so those who perpetuate these recognize that they're not just inflicting harm on one ethnic group, but they're doing so on all. And as we become a more diverse country, which we now know, the number of ethnic minorities will probably surpass 50% before too long. America's looking more like us. And so, we need to have a conversation about how diversity will look in the future and making sure that we stand united as a community.
Thanks. Finally, what actions do you think sort of Asian Americans can take to sort of band together as a sort of voting bloc to really, show their power, as a lot of other ethnic minority groups often do? They talk about the vote of certain groups. I know that in like California, Prop 16, which would have allowed affirmative action, failed partly due to a very loud and vocal group of Asian American voters. So what do you think that people all over the country can do, Asian Americans all over the country can do to make sure that, they vote and their votes matter?
I think we do need to encourage our community to get out and vote. I don't think our voting proportion reflects the actual proportion in our population, in the U.S. I think we can do more to ensure that we voice our I think we can do more to show the strength of our political voice together. Voting is incredibly important. It's the most basic way to voice your concerns or support resources or programs or services or policies. But I don't think we have galvanized our community to the point of being able to have the voice that we should when it comes to politics. Part of that, as you mentioned earlier, is inspiring the next generation of elected officials that are Asian American. But part of it is something that we can all do, which is cast our vote. I think what would be helpful for our community are to find issues that unite us, that we can all get behind, right? It's unfortunate that it's the recent incidents of discrimination and hate against the Asian American community that has really galvanized all of us together, that it doesn't matter what our political stripes are. It doesn't matter our backgrounds. What matters is that we stand together, arm in arm, to push back and voice our opposition to this discrimination and bias that we're seeing. So it's interesting because we as a community, I think, can find those issues that unite us, and make sure that we work together with each other to find a way forward to advocate for these issues. And that will allow the community to be able to become more politically active, and then also prepare them to work on some more challenging issues in the future. One example of an issue that I think all of us can also get behind, but not as prevalent in the news, is addressing and having better and more accurate counts of Asian American statistics in states, those who are uninsured, those who are need social resources, those who may be otherwise struggling, those who need health care, and even health outcomes. Being able to measure that and account for the needs of the Asian American community are important, and even the sub-ethnic groups within the Asian American community are incredibly important. Because if without that information, it's hard to be able to target resources to a health disparity that you might see. It's difficult to be able to target support to a particularly ethnic group in a neighborhood that may be under-resourced. And so not having an accurate count or collection of information about the Asian American community within a state or jurisdiction, or even the sub-ethnic groups within the Asian American community, I think does a real disservice to our community. And that's an issue I think all of us can also get behind.
Well, as an Asian American elected official, then, are there any policies that you would like to implement, like specific policies that you think would help the Asian American community as a whole?
So that issue that I just mentioned is actually one that we've been working on quite a bit. I think we've made some progress in having the state, when it comes to health outcomes, for example, catalog Asian American health outcomes. That was, tough in itself. They used to just calculate white and African American health outcomes, but not the Asian American health outcomes, even though we actually comprise a pretty large proportion of the state's population. Now they finally come around to recognizing that, but we also recognize the Asian American community is not a monolithic community within itself. And so now we're pushing to see if they will record this information for other other major ethnic minorities within the Asian American community. And so we're still working on that piece right now. But those are things where, I think we can continue to make strides on and need to. Another area would be on the translation of documents and state web pages and information into different ethnic languages. I think we recognize that, with a growing Asian American population here in the state, we do need to have information that's accessible to our community, that if they can't read it and they can't understand it, that it doesn't matter if that service or resource is available for them. It needs to be accessible to these individuals as well. And so that's an area where we've been focused on as well. The last one that I'll touch on is, having a better understanding of Asian American culture and history. I think given the fact that we are one of the fastest, if not the fastest growing ethnic minority in the country, I think there can be more that's done to introduce the broader population to Asian American culture and history, that oftentimes it's brushed away or a footnote in a textbook or barely even mentioned. I don't think that does a service to our community either, when the broader public and children as they're growing up aren't exposed to our culture, the challenges that we've had to face, the experiences that we've had. And so I think it's important for the broader public to experience that, have an understanding of where our community is coming from, so that we can continue to build bridges with them. And again, hopefully prevent future instances of hate, discrimination, and bias.
Awesome, thanks. It looks like we're bumping up against the time window, so I just have one last question. You really stressed the importance of getting more Asian Americans in elected office and in government. So what advice would you give to Asian American individuals who are interested in getting involved with government or running for office?
So I would encourage them to, choose an issue that really inspires them, that they feel motivated to get involved in. Everyone has a different issue that really presses their buttons or that really motivates them to get involved. It's hard to put a finger on that specific issue for every individual, but I think everyone can identify at least one issue that they feel passionate about, and use that to either get involved in the political process, to be able to learn how the political process works and how you can get involved in it, because that familiarity with the political process could really well inspire you and give you the inspiration and comfort level to be able to run for office yourself later on. And so I think it's important for our community to take those initial steps, that, we all recognize running for office is hard, but we also all recognize that there's at least one issue that we feel passionate about, and use that as an experience to get involved and see if you can find other like-minded folks to work with you on it. And that might help very well facilitate your entry into the political realm or into the policy realm, and even potentially run for office. And also bearing in mind that, the involvement in the political system doesn't always mean running for office. There are a lot of different ways to get involved, whether it's advocacy or serving as a civil servant in various levels of government, being able to work with nonprofit organizations that will help lead to regulatory change. Those are all ways to become involved in the policy-making process without having to run for office, but are still means to be able to introduce you to the different parts of the political system, and may still very well serve as a jumping point if you decide to run later on. So, I hope that that's useful advice for individuals who want to get involved, because we do want people to get involved in the policy and political process. We need to have a strong voice, and that all starts with our community coming out.
Thanks so much for taking the time to do this interview, and really highlight some of the issues facing the Asian American community and things we can do to help.
Thank you, Ian. It's a pleasure.